Good morning. It's Wednesdays. I'm Wayne. Welcome to Wednesdays with Wayne. Before we get started, I want to thank Mr. Facebook again, Mark Zuckerberg, for allowing us to do this free. I think it's pretty cool that you can make these videos and send them around the world. Nobody charges you anything. I mean, it's incredible. Anyway, it's what we've been talking about for the past several months, about just doing more with less, subject to the point you do everything with nothing. We're now broadcasting around the world out of my kitchen. I mean, with practically nothing. I have a book and a phone and a little 6-inch tripod. So appreciative for the technology that allows us to do this. And that, I think, is part of the reasons why the middle class is being left behind. They haven't kept up. So the education system hasn't kept up. And the middle class is being left behind because of being replaced by technology. We're doing so much more with so much less that we just don't need more human capital. We have technological capital. And so I think the days of the middle class earning more as time goes by, those days could be over. And the days of your kids having a better life than yours could be over. Well, we'll go into it later. First thing I want to do is thank you for your time. So how many of you have other things you could be doing right now? I'm going to see your hands. Okay, thank you. How many don't like it when people waste your time? Okay, good. So you have my commitment. I'll do my best in the next few minutes to make sure your time is well spent. So thank you for showing up and watching today. We're going to cover two simple subjects today. One is how we came to own land. And I've always been curious about this because I'm a real estate broker. And I thought, every now and then my mind wanders and I get to think about things I haven't ever thought of before. And one of them was how this, I go through this closing process. They have the buyer and the buyer's agent and the agent's broker, and you have the seller and the seller's agent and then the seller's broker. Then you have the mortgage company and the underwriters and the appraisers and the surveyors and the inspectors and the contractors and the title escrow people and the title companies, the title commitments and all the underwriters and all their insurers. There's a lot of people involved in trying to get a piece of property, the ownership transferred from one party to another party. It's incredible. And it seems to get more complicated and confusing as days go by. So why, I don't know. I think it could be a lot simpler than it is. Nonetheless, I sit at these closing tables, right? I scratch my head. Who figured all this out? And why is this so complicated? And by the way, how did this all get started? I mean, the Indians, the original Native Americans, they were called Indians, and we've also covered this, learning via trial and error, and but now they're tearing down statues of Christopher Columbus, who was the biggest mistake maker in history. He lands in America, he thinks he's in India. That's why they're called Indians, right? Not Indians, they're Native Americans. Before it was America, I don't know what it was called, but whatever it was, the indigenous people who were here before we got here had no concept of owning land. So I'm just curious where this came from. And I'm reading from Critical Path. I hope you can see this. It might be backwards. I'll turn it over. This is the book that Bucky R. Buckminster Fuller wrote in the 6 weeks before he died. And we've been going through it. So I'll go over today how we came to own land and where the American flag came from. So I'm going to read to you. I know I fired several instructors for reading to adults, so I know it's almost criminal, but I don't know how else to do it right now. So if you're following along, if you have Critical Path, I'm on page 67. We've learned in the last decade, I'm reading this from the book from the early 80s, 81, 2, 3 era. So when he says the last decade, he's talking about the 70s, okay? Okay, thank you. We've learned in the last decade from our behavioral science studies that aggression is a secondary behavior of humans. Secondary behavior. That when humans get what they need when they need it and are not overwhelmed, are spontaneously benevolent. We're chromosomally designed to respond favorably toward one another. It is only when they become desperate that they become aggressive, because what they have relied on is no longer working. There are two kinds of social behavior manifest around the world, the benign and the aggressive. It is probable that this dichotomy occurred in the human versus animal confrontation in the Ice Age time. When the Ice Age starts to recede, the horsemen start north, hunting with clubs and spears. At the same time, moving much more slowly, we have the beginnings of great tribes of humans following their flocks of goats and sheep as the latter lead them to the best pastures, sometimes high in the mountainside, sometimes on great plains. With the big man as king, the head shepherd, we have humanity migrating off into a wilderness that seemed to have no limits. The land belonged to the Great Spirit. The people lived off the flesh of their animals, and they encountered fruits, berries, nuts, and herbs. They kept themselves warm with clothing made of the skins of the animals, and also with environment-controlling tents made of local saplings and animal skins. We have a king shepherd from the day of the giants, tending his people and his flock, when along comes a little man on a horse with a club hanging by his side. He rides up to the king shepherd and, towering above him, says, "Well, Mr. Shepherd, those are very beautiful sheep you have there. You know, it's very dangerous to have such beautiful sheep out here in the wilderness. The wilderness is very dangerous." The shepherd responds, "You know, we've been out here in the wilderness for generations and we've had no trouble at all." Night after night thereafter, sheep begin to disappear. Each day along comes the man on the horse. He says, "Isn't that too bad? I told you it was very dangerous out here. Sheep disappear in the wilderness, you know." Finally, there's so much trouble that the shepherd agrees and pay in sheep for the horseman's protection and to operate exclusively within the horseman's self-claimed land. No one dared question the horseman's claim that he owned the land on which the horseman said the shepherd was trespassing. The horseman had his club with which to prove he was the power structure of that locale. He stood high above the shepherd and could ride in at speed to strike the shepherd's head with his club. This is how multi-millennia ago 20th century racketeers' protection and territorial ownership began. For the first time, little people learned how to become the power structure and how thereby to live on the productivity of others. Then there came the great battles between other individuals on horses to determine who could realistically say, "I own this land." Ownership changed frequently. The ownership claiming strategy soon evolved into horse-mounted warfare as each gang sought to overwhelm the other. Then the horse-mounted gangs, led by a most wily leader, used easily captured human prisoners to build them stone citadels at strategic points. Surrounded by prisoner-built moats, rigged with drawbridges and drawgates, they would come pouring out to overwhelm caravans and others crossing their domains. Deeds to land evolved from deeds of arms. Right? So I thought a deed is transfer of property. Is a noun. Here's your deed. Person, place, or thing. It's a noun. I was always confused because I thought a deed was a verb. You know? Who did that? I did that. You did that? Yeah, I did that. That's a verb. It's a deed. It's something it's an action. So he says, deeds to land evolved from deeds of arms. Then came enormous battles of gangs and the beginning of the great land barons. Finally, we get to power structure mergers and acquisitions, topped by the most wily and powerful of all, the great emperor. This is how humans came to own land. The sovereign paid off his promises to powerful supporters by signing deeds to land earned by the physical deeds of fighting and shrewd support of the right leader. Thereafter, emperors psychologically fortified the cosmic aspect of their awesome power by having priests of the prevailing religions sanctify their land claiming as an accounted simply either by discovery or by arms. So they dragged the priest out, and the priest would bless the deal, and then the populace would accept it. Oh, the priest said it was okay. So yeah, I guess no, it's all right. That's how we came to own land. Now I'm going to go into where the American flag came from. To better understand the coming of world power structure into North American affairs, we will switch back from the 19th to the 17th and 18th centuries to the opening up of North America and the American socioeconomic scene. The European colonization occurred in several major ways. The Spanish way was accomplished with vast haciendas, grants from the king to powerful supporters. The hacienda development began in Central America and Mexico and expanded northward to California. The British king also gave vast plantation grants to royal favorites on the North American southeastern coast below the freezing line. The French came to two parts of North America, one to the Gulf of Mexico, Mississippi Delta, where exiled prisoners were dumped, and two to the St. Lawrence area of Canada, where they moved westward via the Great Lakes, then southward on the Mississippi to join with those lower Mississippi colonists exploring northward and westward on the Mississippi. British sovereign grants were also being given on the northeastern coast, where it was much colder and where existence was much more difficult. Because it was much more difficult to colonize, the royal favorites who received large land grants from the British king in the north did everything they could to encourage colonization of any kind by others who bought their land from their landlords. The Pilgrims and other people of religious conviction found the freedom of thought and act to warrant hazarding their lives in cold winter wilderness. So they were so suppressed by religion, they thought, okay, we could die out here. It's going to be very uncomfortable in this cold northeast, but it's going to be worth it because we're free to act, think, and act as we want. On the northeastern coast of North America, the individuals who did the colonizing were not the landowners who remained safely in Europe. In the south, the royal favorite landowners themselves divided and personally operated many of the great plantations. Though motivated differently, and northern and southern reasons for doing so, we have the East Coast North American British blood people breaking away from the old world through the American Revolution. I'm going to read it again. Though motivated by distinctly different northern and southern reasons for doing so, we have the East Coast North American British blood people breaking away from the old world through the American Revolution. So we were colonists. What I think Bucky's saying here, as the colonists came over, we started settling the land. He's talking about these migrations of Americans. He tracked the migrations from the beginning of time through. It's a long, interesting story, I think, of how the Ice Age receded land that was previously unreachable, became reachable. You just, as the water receded, you could walk across the land now. So we were able to explore and get around the world. Then they developed rafts, then boats, then ships, and then we began traveling and migrating across the planet. He tracks all those migrations. It's really pretty cool. So he's saying that these motivations for these colonists are different. Yeah, them in the north, those in the south, but they're all British blood people that broke away from the Britain, and they're trying to have their own country in the American Revolution. So in our tracing of the now completely invisible world power structures, it is important to note that while the British Empire as a world government lost the American Revolution, the power structure behind it did not lose the war. The most visible power structure entity was the East India Company, an entirely private enterprise whose flag was adopted by Queen Elizabeth in 1600, happened to have 13 red and white horizontal stripes with a blue rectangle in the upper left-hand corner. The blue rectangle bore in red and white the superimposed crosses of St. Andrew and St. George. When the Boston Tea Party occurred, the colonists, dressed as Indians, boarded the East India Company's 3 ships and threw overboard their entire cargoes of high-tax tea. They also took the flag from the masthead of the largest of the ships, the Dartmouth. George Washington took command of the U.S. Continental Army under an elm tree in Cambridge, Massachusetts. The flag used for that occasion was the East India Company's flag, which, by pure coincidence, had the 13 red and white stripes. Though it was only coincidence, most of those present thought the 13 red and white stripes did represent the 13 American colonies. Ergo was very appropriate, but they complained about the included British flag's superimposed crosses in the blue rectangle in the top corner. George Washington conferred with Betsy Ross, after which came the 13 white 5-pointed stars in the blue field with the 13 red and white horizontal stripes. While the British government lost the 1776 war, the East India Company's owners, who constituted this invisible power structure behind the British government, not only did not lose, but moved right into the new USA economy along with the letter's most powerful landowners. And he goes on to prove it. And this is what he writes next. By pure chance, I happened to uncover this popularly unknown episode of American history. Commissioned in 1970 by the Indian government to design new airports in Bombay, New Delhi, and Madras, where the English first established themselves in India in 1600, there I saw a picture of Queen Elizabeth I and the flag of the East India Company of 1600 AD with its 13 red and white horizontal stripes and its superimposed crosses in the upper corner. What astonished me was that this flag, which seemed to be the American flag, was apparently being used in 1600 AD, 175 years before the American Revolution. Displayed on the stairway landing wall, together with a portrait of Queen Elizabeth I painted on canvas, the flag was painted on the wall itself, as was the seal of the East India Company. So that's how we came about owning land. And that, according to him, Bucky Fuller, is where the American flag came from. That's it for today. Thank you for your time. I'll see you next Wednesday, Wednesdays with Wayne, from 9 o'clock until whenever we finish. Thank you for your time. Go out and make it a better world. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks a lot. I'm signing off.